Well, we might as well get the show on the road. We've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to have Heather Johnston from the Dana Point Chamber of Commerce come and join me up here. As she's come on up, I did want to recognize and say thank you to the Orange County Association of Realtors. They always host us each month. They've got this beautiful facility. Let's give OCAR a round of applause. They've got a new member of their team, Tony. Tony, I'm going to mess up your last name. And so you're in good company because I mess up lots of last names. But Capitelli, is that right, Tony? Where are you at? There you are. So Tony is the new Government Affairs Director. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate all your work. Heather, come on up. I have a seat here. So the Chamber of Commerce has really been on the front lines of a lot of issues in the city, and the harbor revitalization project, the crowd laughs, is certainly one of them. So Heather, I'm going to turn the floor over to you and have you give us just kind of an overview of what's happening and what's taking place there at the harbor.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving the Chamber the time to come up and talk about the harbor. As you all know, Dana Point, one of our signature jewels in the crown of Dana Point is our harbor. And I am thankful to be here. I just wanted to let you guys know if you want to know any specifics and get down into details. Victor is here from Lisa Bartlett's office. So he'll be fact checking me, but he's the guy that if you want more information, we'll also have a website at the end if you want to write it down. And every single document you could possibly want is on the website. So we're going to start with the harbor. Okay, so let's do real quick what the harbor is right now. So we have over 40 small businesses in the harbor. And about 136 room hotel, the Ocean Institute, yacht clubs, shipyards, and almost 2,500 boat slips. It brings in 80 million plus a year in revenue. 70% of that is from the slip rentals, and the other percent is for commercial core. Right now it's about a $5 million net income in a year. But to let you guys know that some of the costs that are increasing, most importantly, the Harbor Patrol, and in 5 years, the county has figured out that $5 million will be eaten up by cost. So it's important to take a look at the overall finance of the harbor, which I know Lisa Bartlett's office did, and when she came into office, she really sat down with her group and ran the numbers. And the numbers right now, they were a little wanting. I guess that would be the best way to say it. So why does the harbor, with the exception of people wanting to go to the harbor, why does it matter to the region as a whole? Okay, so it's a regional park for Orange County residents. So it's not just people who own boats. It's also for, it's open for everybody. It's accessibility to the water for people of all ages, all abilities, and it's something that's really important not only for Dana Point, but for the region. It's a main tourist attraction, like I said, for Dana Point, but it's also a tourist attraction for Orange County. We are saying we're the whale watching hub of Orange County, and we also get international exposure for Orange County as a region. We have not had anything more successful than the viral whale videos that has gone around internationally. And that in itself is something you can never buy. You can't buy that kind of coverage. So it attracts people to Orange County, puts Orange County on the map, and it, I think, really highlights the beauty of Dana Point. Okay, so what are we talking about today? So we're talking about the revitalization of the harbor. And just to give you guys a heads up, the harbor was built in 1971 or opened in 1971. And in 1999, they started working on the revitalization of the harbor because it's on the water. And if anybody has anything that's near the water, you know that salt water is very, very damaging to the air, to the buildings and the docks, and it is in badly need of revitalization. We have buildings that are starting to fall apart, buildings that don't currently meet some ADA requirements, things like grease traps, those kind of stuff for restaurants. So it really needs to be revitalized. So they're talking about the LCPA boundary, and really the first initial project is the commercial core, which you can see in red. Okay, so this kind of breaks it down. So we've got the West Basin, East Basin, commercial core. The things that are in red, like the Ocean Institute and the shipyard and Nordhaven yachts, those are something that are not part of the RFQ that we'll be talking about. So this is currently how it is right now. So what they're looking to do is, and you can kind of see the change. One of the biggest issues, besides the fact that the buildings are falling apart, is that there's a lack of parking. So obviously, parking is at a premium in Dana Point, and they're looking to do. You can see the parking deck that is behind the new commercial core, and that parking deck will be a 2-story parking deck. And then they're also looking to do a dry dock. Boat storage, and then you can see down by the water, that's where the commercial core buildings will be. So really we'll be changing out a lot of the buildings, and we'll be, I think, well, I'll just show you. We'll show you some pictures. So this is what the renderings are. So it's going to be an open space. It'll have the ability to have more ocean views, or I guess dock views. Really a beautiful new buildings. And then really, most importantly, the slips. The majority of the slips really need to be redone, and that's a very expensive endeavor. So in a nutshell, these are the existing buildings, existing docks. I know you guys can't see this, but this is, again, all on the county's website. So these are things, if you really want to get into it, it's got the information in there, and I'm just doing a high-level overview. But just a quick timeline, like I said, 1971 harbor opens, and it's been a long, drawn-out process to go through Coastal Commission to get plans approved. It's something that the county has partnered with our businesses. They've rented buses. They've spent countless hours sitting in Coastal Commission meetings, and so it's something that the merchants are very excited about. The boaters are very excited about. There's some issues and there's some concerns, but overall, Lisa Bartlett's office is moving this forward. So in June, we had, they submitted, it was in March. In March, they did a request for quotes. And so what the process will be is they're pushing out requests for quotes around the world. They're looking for a company that has experience building waterfront properties. The supervisor's office said one of the issues is in order for the county to be doing this, they're going to have to hire new people who have experience doing this. So it's better to do a public-private partnership so that they get people who are used to doing this, who are experts at doing this, and working with the county to move it forward. So in June 20th will be the last day to submit the RFQs. They're going to do interviews for the RFQs in July. And in winter, there are going to be a short list announced and RFPs go out. And then hopefully in 2017, RFPs will be awarded. And maybe 2018, we'll get the developer and then we'll have more plans. Again, this is contingent on who wins the RFP and what they're looking to do and how it moves forward. But we're excited about it. So I'm going to leave this one up so it's kind of a good map. So as we're talking, you guys can kind of see what we're talking about.
Perfect. Thanks, Heather. We have from Supervisor Bartlett's office, Victor Cal. Victor, would you join us on the stage, please?
I hope I did an okay job, Victor.
Well, now we're going to find out.
Right?
So I'm going to give you the mic.
Check 1, 2.
Like I said, it was high level.
Heather got any of this right. Now, Victor, I know you've been kind of spearheading the effort with the harbor from the county's perspective, at least from Supervisor Bartlett's office. So can you give us kind of an idea of kind of the next steps and what we're aiming to accomplish in the near term and then certainly in the long term? Maybe anything Heather missed, because Heather gives just a high overview.
Right, over there.
Sure, thanks, Paul.
Oh, here, take this one.
There we go. Thank you. I think we're going to play with mics together.
So the harbor has taken quite some time to be able to develop, and I want you to think about the historical context of the harbor. If you think about coastal development in California, it's taken several number of years. You can look up ULI, Urban Land Institute, videos from Donald Bren, and it took him 28 years to entitle Pelican Hill. Banning Ranch took 20 years to entitle, and they're still getting through Coastal Commission right now. I came from the residential development community, so in preparation of the EIR, it took you about 3 years, which is about the time that it took us. Getting through the regulatory process in California is very difficult. So it took the wisdom of Supervisor Tom Wilson to really actually make sure that we have good stewardship over the harbor. When you think about it in phases, the harbor needed to be the county needed to reassert control over the harbor as the landowner. Initially in 1971, actually in 1968, the main infrastructure was built out, but by 1969, we actually issued an RFP for private development of the harbor. This harbor was privately developed, and there were 3 major leaseholders. And so, and they had 30-year leases essentially, and there was a grand jury report by the 1990s that showed some material deficiencies regarding maintenance. And like I said, it took the wisdom of Supervisor Wilson at the time to be able to bring the harbor back into the fold and to be able to then begin a new process, a new vision for the harbor. It took Supervisor Pat Bates in order to entitle this project, and it's going to take Supervisor Lisa Bartlett to implement this project in partnership with the business community and the boaters, as well as the city of Dana Point. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of how we look at things from a historical perspective, and it kind of keeps our expectations kind of in reality here. As Heather was alluding to the land use plan, we expanded it because, yes, most of the revenue is derived from the slips. And so when we speak to most developers out in the community, they said you have your project backwards, essentially, in essence, is that the marinas provide stabilized revenue in order to capitalize on the commercial core. But nonetheless, we have an entitled project, and we hope that's enough of an incentive for developers to work with us. They're going to be able to pioneer new design procurement methods like design build, which basically reduces the time to develop a project. Your toll roads were built out and had early starts of 4 to 14 months because of these new procurement methods. So in essence, I think this is, the supervisor believes that this is the best way to go. She had a unanimous approval from the Board of Supervisors to move forward in this manner, and we hope to deliver the project very soon.
You know, with the coalition, I touched upon it earlier, we represent the business community, large and small. And, you know, over the last number of recent years, and certainly probably back to when Supervisor Wilson started the idea or the process of revitalizing the harbor, there's been an idea that, you know, there are a lot of local businesses that have been there a long time. And so, you know, as I have heard, you know, folks are concerned that this revitalization means that they're going to go away. And, you know, we're not going to get into the benefits or not of that sort of path, but what does the county see, what does the chamber see as kind of a path forward to ensure that those folks can continue to operate as is, or at least continue to have a role in the harbor?
So we're very committed to the businesses that are there right now. I meet with them probably on a weekly, every 2 to 4 weeks. And if anything, they were directly involved in terms of the drafting of this RFQ. In the RFQ documents, which I have with me, one of the major pinnacle cornerstones of the RFQ has to be the 12 guiding principles, which was a consensus plan through the leadership of Tom Wilson and the task force at that time. Secondly, the merchants and the boaters together, the primary stakeholders within the community, we asked for recommendations in terms of what their needs are. And we put that into the RFQ document in order to say a message to any private partner to say, you need to take notice of the community character, the family atmosphere, because that's a vital part in the success of your project. These are your customers, and this is going to be your community to work with. So, you know, it's a balancing act between, I think it'll kind of play out within a development agreement, but we're very much vested in the interest of both the merchants and voters, as well as the greater community of Dana Point.
Sure. You know, Heather, as the Chamber of Commerce, you represent really the business community in the city. How has your partnership and relationship been with the supervisor's office in the last couple of years, moving this project forward?
Well, I'd like to actually thank the coalition. The coalition has been really good. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and the coalition was really great about meeting with the supervisor's office and said, hey, we are getting feedback from so many different parties of erroneous information. we would encourage you to really do an outreach. And I know that Supervisor Bartlett's office was already outreaching to the harbor merchants and harbor specific, but it's not just the harbor, it's people that come down from Laguna Niguel and shop and say, oh, I heard you guys are they're going to tear down the harbor next week and you guys are going to be out of business. And so those are the things.
They're not? I thought that was the
No,
best
yeah. Yeah. And surprisingly, we don't want that opinion out there. So it's been something that's been really great. Supervisors Bartlett's office has really made a concerted effort, thanks in part with you, to really talk about how we can get not only our merchants the correct information out, but the chamber and our other community partners, so that they know that this, like everything, you say, oh, the harbor's going to be developed, but let's be honest, it's going to be years. And it's going to be years that those businesses are going to be in there, and once construction starts, that's an even more important time for us to be supporting our businesses and making sure that everyone knows that they're open and they still need to go down and shop.
When I introduced myself earlier, I am the local guy for SoCal Gas, and so we're playing in the regulatory community all the time. And our primary partner on the other side is the Public Utilities Commission. For this project, it's the Coastal Commission, and these great commissions that we get to play with sometimes make things slow. And so I'm wondering, can you give us an idea, are we done with the Coastal Commission on this project? Have they blessed it and we're full steam ahead, or do we still have some hurdles before us with the Coastal Commission, Victor?
In all candor,
Yes and
we
no.
probably have some interaction.
That's why I asked.
We would likely have some interaction with Coastal Commission again.
Yeah.
The reason why is because, as Heather had mentioned, there's that dry boat storage building. No one had wanted that within the community. Not really. Coastal Commission actually forced that down on the community to build that out. And that's over $30 million in itself without the infrastructure for it.
Which one, Victor?
Sorry, it's the dry boat storage. I think we have to back up this slide.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Oh, I broke it. Sorry.
let me put it,
I'm sorry.
let's talk about incentives. So if your dry boat storage building is over $30 million, you have to capitalize that and raise the rates of dry boat storage. So they were thinking of some advanced technological crane that would take and move boats, right? There's another facility that's being built out in Marina Del Rey that does that. At the time, it was just something from the history that I gathered from voters. It was something that the commission at the time, that makeup, had heavily desired. The thing is that if you have a really expensive dry boat storage building, what does that factor in terms of the rates in which you store your boats? It's going to be pretty high, right? Why would I store my boat in dry boat storage when I have a vessel in the water ready to go? What happens to the rates there? So naturally, the incentives are mixed up when it comes to where you want to put your boat. Secondly, if you look at the elevations online that are in the document, the massing is incredible. I mean, it's a 65-foot building. It's incredibly huge. Is there a way to mitigate the impact of that building? So I think through consensus, both the community, both from a cost factor as well as in terms of quality of life factor, that's something that we might have to go through the city as the primary LCP body, as well as Coastal Commission if anyone appeals. But I think that's a relatively easy hurdle to get over through, and it's reasonable. That's the issue here. Luckily, the dry boat storage is phase 5 in the project, so it's at the very end. So I can tell you, in terms of starts, July 5th is going to be when we're going to start on the street improvements that requires infrastructure. We're bringing down recycled water to all the parkway areas within the harbor, which should, in our responsibility regarding the drought order, should be very copacetic with South Coast Water District. Subsequently, we have other great events that are honoring and cherishing our past, which is the opening of the time capsule, which is going to be on August 29th. You should really be there. there's stories where people have called, they have the original barbecue dinners that were promised 50 years ago, and there are people that are calling and say, hey, I'm going to be there, make sure that my ticket's still good.
That's awesome.
They might be hoarders a little bit.
You are all welcome to join too. And later on, in order to move forward on the project as well, we did get approval for phase 3, which is your wharf and renovations here. Like Heather said, there's a dire need to support these businesses. So to make a business decision is that if I have to spend $1 in order to make 10, that's what we're going to do in our commitment to the merchants that are already there. So those are some of the things that we're moving on. It'll be tricky with the parking deck because do we want to take on that risk ourselves, or do we want to distribute that risk to our private partner? And that's the benefits. That's one of the benefits of the P3. There's an analysis done by the Legislative Analyst's Office through the state of California that shows how you can maximize public-private partnerships and basically transfer risk to the private sector, get quicker financing, and move the project along through innovative methods like design build. So in that essence, I think there will be the parking deck as well as everything else kind of fold into the timeline. Everything is very tiered and tranched in order to move the project along. So that's a complicated answer, and if you have more questions, I think
we have time. I think we have time. We have about 5 minutes or so that we can field questions from the audience. There are a lot of folks here from Dana Point who may have some questions. We're going to do Q&A for our second half at the back end, but are there any questions that we can handle right now for the next couple of minutes having to do with the harbor?
2 questions. One, where's the funding coming from? And 2, can I assume that the developer who you bring on board has the ability to modify the concept plan?
Yeah, so in essence, there are 2 things with the coastal development permit. One is that it provided a footprint that we're working in. Secondly, it worked through, really it's about coastal access. So how you implement the project. At all times, we need to have a certain amount of parking available for boaters. So keep that in mind in terms of this project. Where the money's coming from? It would come from a private developer, private markets. And there's really good examples of coastal development that's actually happening right now. Redondo Beach just went and worked with a company called CenterCal. They were able to get $250 million for the development of the waterfront in Redondo Beach, in which, again, it's a very similar type of marina. Although I think Dana Point is better, obviously.
You have to say that in this
Right,
room.
yeah.
I mean, they don't have the whale watching experience, the community events, and everything that goes on in Dana Point Harbor. It's a very unique experience. But in terms of transferring that risk, again, they're putting out their financial capital. They have a quicker access to markets to be able to bring in all that cash to be able to start this project. It doesn't mean that the county absolves itself of responsibility. We'll likely have a couple $1 million investment in infrastructure as well as to get this project started. The reason being is that the reason why the supervisor and the board of supervisors went in this direction is because if you look at a 50-year time span, a public project required subsidies from the general fund. And so in a greater wisdom to protect taxpayers, one, the Tidelands Trust is isolated. In order for harbor revenue that's generated there stays in the harbor. And this is pursuant to public trust doctrine. So that's another important thing to keep in mind regarding this project. But nonetheless, because the harbor is independent, we need to make sure that we can protect those reserve funds so that we can do other infrastructure like the marinas. So, sorry again, another complicated answer to your question.
Maybe one more, maybe I saw a few hands.
Victor, when you're working on the buildings, do you do one at a time so you can continue business there? How does that work?
Yes, so the coastal development permit was very specific in how we implement the project. Phase 1 is the infrastructure improvements. Phase 2 is technically the parking deck, although we can skip over that and advance phase 3, which is the wharf renovations. Phase 4 is then the buildings. So the question about the building pads, at least when the county was considering this project, we were thinking about just building up pads and then building the essential buildings that were needed. And then in terms of cash flow, that's really the purpose. So for you developers out there, I think you guys understand in terms of making sure that you have consistent cash flows. And then last was the dry boat storage building. So in terms of that project, we hope that we can get some more innovative new techniques to be able to develop out the footprint of the harbor.
Very good. Well, I tell you what, thank you, Victor and Heather. They both agreed to stick around throughout. Well, they want to see the second half of the show, so that was part of the deal. But they also agreed that they would stick around after the event and field any questions you may have. They're not going to run out of here, so they will make themselves available. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you for the insight. And the coalition will continue to monitor this project. We look at both the county and the chamber as great partners as we continue to focus on progress for the region. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. We need your support.
My understanding is that we have Measure H and Measure I. And Deborah, you are pro H. And
Yes.
opposing
Yes.
I.
Is this
And
on?
so- well, this mic here is going to go back to the camera.
You can hear that?
He can hear, and that's the important part. But they
Okay.
can hear through this mic. That works for that.
Okay, good.
So that's why I said we got mics coming out of our ears up here. Deborah, tell us a little bit about H. What is going on with H? What is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish?
Okay, well, let me say this. Both Measure H and Measure I are in favor of developing this 75 acres we call town center. Where we differ significantly and part company is how we're going to develop town center. So H starts with the original 2008 town center plan, which was a community effort, a subcommittee of citizens, 30 public hearings, and unanimously approved by the city council. And its primary goal, as stated in the plan, is a primary shopping district with a small village atmosphere. So the city had a vision, and the city had a strategy, and the city had a plan, and a good plan, the 2008 Town Center Plan. And we see that plan as being under attack. And a majority on the city council has attacked the plan in a significant way. And so we as the citizens have decided that, enough is enough, our voice is not being heard, and Measure H is what we need to get our plan back. And that's really it in a nutshell. Now, I know that they're saying on the other side that we can't afford Measure H. And I'm glad we're here in a economic coalition, because I don't often get a chance to speak to the economic issues. But let me explain why Measure H actually makes sense economically, and why we feel that Dana Point can't afford Measure I. The first concern we have is that Measure I really is anti-business. The 2008 Town Center Plan, which Measure H is defending, says that permits dwellings, residences, above the street level only. And so the first major project, which is kind of the genesis of Measure H, was the Majestic project. Well, it's building 109 high-density residential units, and the retail commercial is only on the very short sides of the building on the first floor. The entire long sides, the lantern streets, are residential. And the building is 4 stories of residential, not 3 stories, which our plan says is our maximum limit in terms of stories. So the entire project is 90% residential, which significantly changes it from mixed use to now residential. And the consequence of this is that it significantly decreases the sales tax in the area, while at the same time increasing a population that's going to need city services and actually potentially be a cost center. But the second reason I say that Measure I is fiscally irresponsible is basically the city's financial position. From 2009 through now, Dana Point has operated at in the red every year. There's 2014, they sold a piece of property for $3.6 million, and they used that to offset expenses. So it looks like a $500,000 profit. But if you take out that extraordinary event, it's been in the red every year. And since 2008, the city's net worth has plunged $30 million. The city has sunk between $20 million and $30 million in cash in the town center, and $16 million of that has been sunk into town center in the last 2 years alone. The city's experts project annual revenues of $672,000 at total build-out, and total build-out probably won't be for 10 years at least. So if we use that $20 million that they've sunk into the town center, we're looking at 25 years to recoup that cost and break even. And if it turns out to be more, which our figures show it's so far more like $26 million, we're looking at 40 years. The city's experts say it's $40,000 for the city to build a parking space. So they set the in lieu fee at $40,000. But on 9/15/15, and this is very important because this is where the city council started significantly altering the town center plan, and this is why H came into being, because we're defending the original town center plan. Well, they drastically reduced that $40,000 in lieu fee to $15,000. And at the same time, they drastically reduced the minimum number of parking spaces. So the result is that the parking space will now cost the city $25,000, and they've incentivized builders to pay a deeply discounted in lieu fee of $15,000 rather than build a parking space. So now we see a pressure cooker for parking. We've increased residential to 90% at the expense of our mixed use. We've drastically reduced the parking minimums, and we've incentivized builders to pay deeply discounted fees rather than build parking. So we actually think it's ironic that Measure I backers are pushing the no empty lots, because we see that after build out, if their parking assumptions are wrong, there will be no empty lots to build parking spaces. And okay, if there is a space to build them, then the city will have no money or maintenance and construction. So the best practice in planning and development is to have a parking place in plan before building, and that's not what the city's done. You know, if you can't park it, you can't create visitor traffic for economic viability. So we see Measure I as promoting a lot-by-lot infill development scheme with no parking. Bottom line, it's a bad investment, there's no planning, and it's just not fiscally responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Harold, I did not mention, how long did you serve on the city council?
I was on from 1994 to 2002.
Forgive me for not mentioning that when
That's
I called
quite
you.
all right.
So
A lot of people forget that.
No. Well, I'd like to turn to you now. And so Measure H was put out there initially, and now I understand Measure I is following up in response to Measure H.
That's correct.
And so you're representing the group that is supportive of Measure I. And so tell us what's going on from your perspective.
Well, Measure I is a real reaffirmation of the plan that was developed by the City Council and that went to the Planning Commission and the City Council and the Coastal Commission. Deborah told you that there were 30 public meetings held with a committee of 15 people, 2 of whom were City Council members, Wayne Rayfield and Laura Anderson, and the other 13 were made up of people who live in Dana Point, Capitol Beach, and Monarch Beach, and business representatives, and they were led by a professional urban planner from Roma Development out of San Francisco, and they came up with the plan that everybody approved, went to the Coastal Commission, and then that is basically the basics of Measure I. When it went to the Coastal Commission, by the way, it came back from the Coastal Commission with some changes. The City Council made them, but one of the things the Coastal Commission said was, we want you to come up with a new parking plan, and we want to see that parking plan at the Coastal Commission. So in 2015, now the Coastal Commission approved it in 2008. The City Council, no City Council did anything until about 2013, when a group of us went to the council and finally convinced them to start building the town center plan, and we got a 5-0 vote to go ahead and spend the money. And the money that was spent, that Deborah says reduced our net worth, was in fact money that was put aside for this development. So we didn't take reserve money. We took, the city took money that was already set aside to develop Town Center. There was some opposition, by the way, of spending that money in Town Center. There were some people that wanted us to spend it in Capitol Beach, but Capitol Beach really wasn't ready. There was no plan. Capitol Beach will come sometime in the future. But those people, the Capitol Beach people that didn't want us to spend the money in Town Center, are really the center, the impetus for this Measure H. So that was the plan. In 2015, the new city council came in and came up with a new parking program. I'm sorry, it was the old city council, came up with a new parking program that was approved on a 4-to-1 vote. And that was then went to the Coastal Commission and for a local coastal plan amendment. And that's what's in there now. So what the city decided to do when they put Measure I on the ballot, and by the way, they put Measure I on the ballot because council members felt that there was a problem with the way that the Measure H people got their signatures. There was some anecdotal evidence that not everybody was told exactly what they should have been told. You know what it's like to gather signatures. And so they decided that they would like to have both measures put on the ballot, both plans. They wanted Measure H and they wanted Measure I, which is the plan that's in existence, so the people can take a look at both of them and decide what they want to do. And if you looked at the Dana Point voter pamphlet, it's about a half an inch thick because it's got both plans in it. So when Measure H came on, the city council said, you know, we need to take a look at the economic impact of Measure H. What does it mean if Measure H passes? So the city council hired a company called Kaiser Marston, an economic consulting firm out of Los Angeles, and they did a very extensive survey, study and put a lot of numbers through their algorithms. And they came up with a 30-minute presentation, PowerPoint presentation, and a report that was about the same size as the voter manual. But basically, here's what they said, and this is the summary of their report. They said, successful implementation of the Town Center Plan requires flexibility to adapt the standards to reflect the variety of Lantern District sites. They said the impacts created by suburban-style parking requirements render desirable mixed-use development financially infeasible. They said the initiative's preference for office uses and minimization of residential uses constrain successful Town Center Plan implementation since residential is the strongest economic use. They said the initiative requirements could cause the city to forego $673,000 a year in general fund revenues and one-time revenues of $4.2 to $4.27 million. They said the city invested $20 million in Lantern District improvements to assist in implementing the Town Center Plan. The initiative requirements are likely to eliminate any chance for successful Town Center Plan implementation. Now, we think that the Measure H is really an anti-growth measure, and we think that it is an anti-growth measure and stop development in Town Center for 4 specific reasons. First of all, the first reason has to do with height. Both plans say 40-foot buildings with 3.5 feet of mechanical on top. Measure H says nothing can go above that 43 inches. You can't have an elevator, you can't have a stairwell, you can't have a guardrail, you can't have anything above the 42 inches above the 40 feet. If you have a 30-foot building and you want to put in an elevator, the elevator shaft's going to be 16 feet high. That takes you up to 46 feet. That's higher than 43.5 feet. Measure H says you can't do that. Therefore, if you want an elevator, you get rid of the top floor. That makes it now retail on the bottom and 2 floors of mixed use on top instead of 3 floors of mixed use on top. Okay, I can go through the parking, but there are 2 other measures, 2 other things that are very, very important. And one is that Measure H says that if any changes are to be made to the Town Center Plan, they have to be approved by the people. It has to go back to a vote of the people. That is ballot box zoning. So if the Coastal Commission decides to make a change to the parking program and it comes back to the city is going to have to put that on the ballot to get approval in order to implement that plan. The city can't do it, the council can't do it on their own. And the final thing is that there's a provision in H that says, any aggrieved person or Dana Point registered voter shall have the right to maintain an action for equitable relief to restrain any violation of the act or city failure to enforce the duties imposed by the act. Now, it says an aggrieved person or any Dana Point registered voter. Now, an aggrieved person, and I'm not a lawyer, but everybody's a lawyer if you look it up on the internet. An aggrieved person says an aggrieved party can be any person whose financial, personal, or property rights or interests are adversely affected by an act of another or an order, judgment, or statute. So you have to have been damaged physically or financially in order to be an aggrieved person. But this says you don't have to be an aggrieved person. So if somebody in Capistrano Beach doesn't like the fact that a developer puts in a tree they may think doesn't correspond to the guidelines, they sue. If they don't like the color and they think that doesn't go along with the guidelines, they sue. So it's going to be continued lawsuits against the city, which are going to cost a lot of money and, in fact, stop development. So with having to go to a vote every time you want to change the plan, with having to allow lawsuits with no jeopardy, the parking requirements that they're doing, Kaiser Marston said, remember, the Kaiser Marston said, the impacts created by suburban-style parking requirement render desirable mixed-use development financially infeasible, and the fact that their height limits are such that nothing can be above 43.5 feet, including stairwells or elevator shafts, make it impossible to build in Dana Point, and that ruins the entire plan.
Harold, that was a long minute.
Thank you.
You know, I would like to point out that we are broadcasting live around the world this morning. Not kidding. I'm not kidding about that. Via Facebook Live, and I prefaced that, or I prefaced the next statement with that statement by we're going to field questions from the crowd. And so I understand that this is a hot button issue. I can be very mean despite my boyish good looks. That you know, we're going to cut you off. And so if this is not an opportunity for you to get up and tell us your view of the universe or your view per se of the measures, but this is an opportunity for you to ask the subject matter experts of these two competing measures so for clarity or for more information. And so I would ask if you would have a question, raise your hand, very pointed question, and we are happy to field those in the spirit of education of the fine community of South Orange County. We'll let you bet lead off, sir.
If Deborah could speak to the litigation issue that Harold raised.
Thank you.
Repeat the question, Paul.
Yeah, and so the question was, could Deborah speak to the litigation issue that Harold raised during his talk?
Yes, thank you for your question, because I know that's one of the talking points, that there will be frivolous lawsuits. Let me assure you that is not the case. That is not the language in Measure H, and as he said, it is an aggrieved party. So it has to be somebody who's actually sustained some sort of damage. Something has happened because of an action that is being taken. And in addition to the language in Measure H, the language in Measure H is just reaffirming the legal standard, and that is something called, I don't want to get into the weeds, but it's something called standing. So a court will toss out a case if you are not a person who is personally involved and damaged by an action of another. You will not have standing. So I'm glad you gave me a chance to debunk that.
Excuse me, may I make a statement? If you look in the voter pamphlet, Section 7 of Measure H says, and I quote, any aggrieved person or Dana Point registered voter shall have the right to maintain an action for equitable relief. So it doesn't say you have to be aggrieved. It says you can be aggrieved or you can just be a Dana Point registered voter.
But you lost the last half of that the courts require legal standing.
No,
So
it doesn't say that in the measure.
Excuse me, we are not going to engage
Okay.
in
the court says that.
We're going to allow the presidential election to handle those sort of things. This morning is about getting information out. Wendy, yes, ma'am.
Hi, Wendy Buckman with the City of Mission Viejo. We had a similar measure in Mission Viejo, Measure D, and it was a ballot box zoning measure that would have been significantly detrimental. I can tell you that between 2008 and today, what is required and what is needed for the market for building has significantly changed.
Respectfully, Wendy, let's get to a question.
So, my question is, do you see this as a similar measure, either one of you, to Measure D in Mission VA, which is ballot box zoning measure? If you don't know what Measure D was, I'm not gonna explain it, because you want a question.
Fair enough, thank you, Wendy. And Wendy, apologies, but we gotta get to it. Harold, I'll let you bat lead off.
Well, excuse me, Wendy, I apologize, I'm not familiar with D, but I am familiar with a measure that was called Measure Z in Rancho Santa Margarita, and and Deborah was quoted at that time saying that she was against Measure Z, and one of the reasons she was against it was because it provided ballot box zoning. And that's really what this does now, but now she's no longer against ballot box zoning.
Okay, I have to,
Real quick.
no, I have to
I
say
will
something
give you
there.
the mic in a moment, in just a moment.
Because that's simply not
We will cut
true.
the discussion off at this point if we don't observe some decorum. I would ask you both not to make this personal. It is not about Harold versus Deborah.
No.
It's about two competing measures. So with ballot box zoning, I understand that issue. I think we all do in the room. Deborah, we'll give you a chance to rebut or to respond.
Thank you. First, I have to address this Measure Z. They tried to get this into the newspaper, and the newspaper rejected it. My name was used without my knowledge or permission. I only found out about Measure Z last week when the newspaper called me to say that the Measure I people are trying to say just what this man has said. So that is, completely false. I didn't back it. But even if I had, the point of that is that, like Measure H, yes, major plan changes would go to the voters. So I wasn't against it, and if my name was used, it wasn't in a method that is inconsistent with Measure H. So let me just address Measure H. It's only major changes, and the reason is this was a plan of the people of Dana Point. This was 2 years, $2 million of our money, 15 people from the Dana Point who are on a subcommittee, and 30 public meetings. So if you're going to change it like Measure I does, and that's why we're for Measure H, because it's the original town center plan. If you're going to make the major changes that the city council made last September, yes, we want the people to have a chance to weigh in on that.
We have another question. In the back, yes.
Yes, quick question for Deborah. There's a lot of discussions specifically today that this is not anti-development, we're going back to the original plan. When I look at the changes proposed, as an example, the original plan allowed roof decks, just like the rest of the entire city. The new plan and the new development standards that are trying to be implemented under H actually makes it more restrictive. It's the most restrictive part of the town now. And so if that was the original plan, why are we making development standard changes?
What
So the question is,
restriction?
why are we making development standard changes with Measure H? Deborah?
Okay, we're not making development standard changes. We're enforcing the development standard in the original town center plan, which allowed for a small portion of a building to have a roof deck. So, and to address the point of the high elevators, you don't need a 2-story building. You can have a 3-story building and a roof deck, and what you do is you have your elevator to the 3rd story, and then you have a ramp up to the roof deck, and you don't need the 60-foot towers that are going to be on the Majestic project.
Another question. Let's get somebody else. Yes, sir.
Is it true that the Majestic project, and it's called something else now, is that actually been entitled, and that's not actually going to get built out regardless of what happens?
So the question is, has the Majestic project been entitled, and is it going to be built out regardless of the two measures? So Harold, can you bat first on this?
Yes, actually Majestic was approved, and it is being built currently. Actually, Majestic sold it to a company called Raintree, which is a Laguna Niguel company, and they've made some changes to it. For example, they've gotten rid of the roof decks, I'm told. They've made some changes to the elevation and that type of thing. So, but it is entitled. There's another project that's entitled on the corner of PCH and Golden Lantern that's being built by the Charles Company, where the bank is Union Bank. We don't think that pencils out, so we don't think that's ever going to get built. And there's another project that was approved on the corner of Amber Lantern and Del Prado that is now a hole in the ground because it required 2.5 levels of underground parking, and the guy that put it forward is a finance man, and he's unable to get any financing because of the cost of doing that. So that project is sitting there as a hole in the ground. We don't think the Charles Company is actually going to build, we don't know, but Majestic is, or the Raintree project is being built right now.
Deborah, do you have something to add on that?
Yes, I do, and that, that is part of the problem with why Measure H is coming in, because when we went to the Planning Commission, Majestic, hundreds of people came and opposed Majestic's plan. They moved it from City Hall to the community center. So many people were wanting to be heard and objecting. And the Newport Beach spokeswoman for the Majestic got up there and promised us, no, we're going to be here for you. We're here for Dana Point. We're not going to just build this and leave. Well, she was right. They didn't just build it and leave. They didn't even build it. They sold it to Raintree, made a lot of money, and now it's going to be apartments. So that's the kind of thing we're saying. That's why we need Measure H to get that original town center plan back on track.
I need to make one comment very quickly. Majestic paid $16 million for the project, for the property. They held it for 10 years, paid property tax for the 10 years. They put $2 or $3 million into the planning. They sold it for $21 million. They did not make a lot of money. They made maybe $1 million. $1 million on $16 million over a 10-year period, that's not a great economic return.
That's our point with Measure I, too.
Do we have any other questions? Hands everywhere. Let's go back over here.
I just wonder if Jennifer can clarify the
Deborah?
Deborah?
clarify the I position on the parking situation.
So we
I'm
asked
not for I.
We asked for a clarification on the parking. Do you want it for Measure H? Yes. Measure H is clarification on the parking.
Well, the original town center plan had a parking plan, which is what we're trying to put back in place. And it said that town center, this little 75 acres, there's superimposed circle that says within a quarter mile, you're supposed to use the developer fees and provide parking on these centralized parking lots because the city expert determined that a quarter of a mile was a reasonable amount of space for, or reasonable amount of distance for people to walk. So it says, build these parking spaces, centralized parking, so people can park within a quarter mile radius, leave their car, and then walk around town center. That on 9/15/15, if you look at the town center plan now, has a large X through it because that's what the city council, well, at least a majority on the city council, they eliminated it. So that's what we're trying to get back.
Okay, a couple more questions. Sir?
Yeah, I'm disappointed that they turned this into apartment rentals. Are there approved plans for condos, fee simple ownership condos there?
Are there a plan for condos?
Not currently, not at the Raintree project, and the Charles Company is also apartments. But the apartment rents are probably going to be $2,000 to $3,000 a month. There are no low-income housing, low-income apartment requirements, so there aren't going to be any low-income apartments. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have the ability to say you can't build apartments, you got to build condos. All they can do is say it's residential.
Are they going to have ocean views?
No, maybe the top floor might, but it depends on what's developed across the street. If the people across the street go 40 feet, they're going to lose their ocean view. However, they did have, again, Majestic asked for, and roof decks are allowed under I, but only on the inland portion of the couplet. The ocean side of PCH, the inland side of Del Prado, only in that area. And it required a special permit. You had to get a use permit to do that. Excuse me. And then if you have a 40-foot building and you have to have an elevator, you're up again 56, 58 feet. But the plan also required that the elevators couldn't take up more than 5% of the roof deck. So it's really limited to the amount of space. But that's the only place that you could have roof decks. And if the roof decks, if somebody did it, then there would be an ocean view.
We're gonna field one more question, then we'll both give you both an opportunity for a final word. And then I didn't ask beforehand. Are you available to field questions after this morning?
Sure.
So If you didn't get your question asked here initially, they will be available to answer questions at the conclusion. So do we have one more question? Let's go. Yes, ma'am.
Could you please discuss the impact of the reduced parking from Measure H and how that is going to be mitigated as it relates to the residential area that's existing in Dana Point in that area?
Are you talking about how Measure H would do it, or I? Okay.
So the question is how Measure I would reduce parking and its impact?
How it would impact residential areas?
That's a good question, Sue, and here's what the city council is trying to do. On the ocean side of Del Prado, Santa Clara and the streets towards the ocean, the city council is proposing putting in a parking, what do you call it, Bob? Parking benefit district, where the residents will get a sticker in their car, similar to what the parking is around the high school. They'll get a sticker in their car, and they'll get 5 or 6 placards that they could hand out to guests that they could put in their car when they come to visit. And if they have that sticker or that placard, they can park on the street as long as they want to without anything going on. But to discourage commercial parking from parking in that area, and we can't eliminate parking in that area because that's in the coastal zone. The Coastal Commission won't allow us to eliminate non-residential parking in that area. But to incentivize people not to do that, there will be kiosks at the corners where if you want to park there, you use your smartphone app or you use a credit card, and you can pay for parking, and it'll be a limited amount of time, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. It's going to require that the city enforce it, which is something that I really would be on the city council to make sure that they do. But that would minimize the amount of commercial parking or non-residential parking on those streets. On the other side, on the inland side of PCH, there they can restrict parking to residents only. But what the city council said they would do is they would ask the people if they wanted to have restricted parking. And they would go on a block-by-block basis. And if 50% of the people on that block, I don't know if it's a renter or people who live there or owners, I'm not sure about exactly how that was worded, but if 50% of the people vote to have restricted parking, they'll have restricted parking, stickers in their window, placards for their guests, and nobody can park there unless you have one of those. Similar to at the high school when the high school is in session. So that would minimize the impact on the inside.
Please. Sounded like ballot box zoning there. But my point is that with reduced parking, changing a mixed use to 90% residential and building all these apartments, there's not going to be parking. It's going to spill over to these neighborhoods. Yeah, okay, so you give me a sticker that says I can park there, but if there's no parking, it doesn't help me. And that's the pressure that we see and that neighbors are already seeing, and that's why we're backing Measure H.
Okay, well, we will give you both 1 minute, kind of closing remarks. Deborah, we let you lead off first time around.
Okay.
We'll let you lead off the second time around, all right?
I thought you were going to say the other way.
No, ladies first.
Thank you.
All right. So you've got 1 minute, ready, go.
Oh, so I just want to say that Measure H stands for the proposition that if you like the 2008 Town Center Plan, which is overwhelmingly popular, 2008 Town Center Plan, which is overwhelmingly popular with Dana Point residents, then you want to vote yes on H and no on I, because what H does is says, go back, implement the plan that we all agreed on, and let's build a town center that is the primary shopping district with the small town village atmosphere. That's what the city promised us, and that's all we're trying to get to. Measure I is trying to say that they are the people defending the town center plan. But if you read their initiative, it is the town center plan as amended on 9/15/15, and that is a significantly different plan, and we oppose that plan.
Almost exactly 1 minute. Yes, I'm impressed. Harold, you got 1 minute, ready, go.
Measure I says an economic development is available in Dana Point. Measure I says there's a vision for Dana Point moving on into the future, a new vision that's going to generate income, generate profits, generate jobs, and be good for the economy in Dana Point. Measure H stops that. Measure H makes major changes to the development standards, and Measure H stops any kind of development. Pure and simple, bottom line, Measure H is a no-growth initiative. Measure I takes the city of Dana Point forward from where it is today. So we ask people to vote no on H and yes on I. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you both very much. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you very much.